In here and Ukraine and Israel. There are some very interesting patterns, some very interesting similarities that we're going to talk about. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here, and Israel. I lost my comments here. Israel and Ukraine. There are some very interesting similarities. Let's talk about the two. Generally we talk about them separately. We talk about what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Israel, the money to Ukraine, the money to Israel, blah blah blah. Right, but let's put them together. Some things to think about. Some interesting similarities and what it means. Let's start here. One thing, if you've been following the Ukraine situation for years, if you've been following the rhetoric coming out of the extremists in Ukraine, one of the things that you realize is that some of the neo-Nazi forces in Ukraine actually, for several years now, have looked admirably at Israel. They have spoken admirably about Israel, and I'll tell you what that makes me think of. Well, let me tell you what, before that, and I'll tell you why it makes me think of this. One of the things that they've spoken admirably about Israel, principally the main thing is this, and that is they see it as an ethno-fascist, as an ethnically clean state, right? They see this as, look, this is a state that's saying we're going to be one ethnicity. That ethnicity is going to have all of the power. That ethnicity is going to have all of the laws in their favor, and any other, the other principal ethnicity is going to be suppressed, is going to be oppressed, is going to be mistreated, is going to have no power, right? So it's going to be an ethnically pure state as far as power is concerned. And if there isn't what they view as the one main alternate ethnicity, that ethnicity will be suppressed. Okay. And so a lot of people, the Ukrainian neo-Nazis, of course, the way they saw it is the ethnicity of supremacy in Israel will be the Jewish ethnicity. You can call it a religion, you can call it ethnicity, it doesn't matter. You understand what I'm saying. And of course, the Palestinians, the Muslims, they will be second-class citizens. And of course, in Ukraine, the way they saw it was the Western Ukrainians, as they see it, will be the supreme ethnicity, as they saw themselves as not being Slavs, right? They've been convinced that they're not Slavs, they're not of Slavic nature, they're actually of Aryan nature. And so therefore, their version of the Palestinians would be the ethnic Russian population who embraced their ethnicity, their culture, their language, etc. So they're like, okay, great. I like what Israel's doing. We need to do something similar. Maybe we can build a wall. Maybe we can, suppress their everything that they can do. And oh boy, that's perfect. So the neo-Nazis, interestingly enough, saw Israel as the model that they wanted to recreate in Ukraine. And they've come out and if you've been people who have been following it, no, they have not been shy about saying, hey, Israel, that's the way we want to go. We want to have basically ethno-fascism, right? An ethnically pure state. And so bottom line is, I think that's one thing. And what's interesting about that, and that is that entire ideology traces its political and cultural legacy back to the United States. Why is that? What a lot of people don't understand about the Nazis, I would advise people reading a book called Conjuring Hitler. The book is called Conjuring Hitler, and it's a book about how basically the collective West, the US, UK, etc., created Hitler and the Nazis intentionally as a bulwark against the Russians. We're going to create this Nazi machine. It's going to take the Russians out. Of course, the old Frankenstein, whether it's ISIS, whether it's these Nazis in Ukraine, the U.S. empire creates these Frankenstein monsters, and eventually they come back and bite it in the butt, right? So that being said, understand a couple of things. Hitler, in his office, had a picture of Henry Ford, who he referred to as his inspiration. Let's just say Henry Ford wasn't all that crazy about Jews. That would be an understatement, right? And the Nazis often spoke of how they looked at the Jim Crow laws, the cultural Jim Crow in America, how Americans treated Black people, particularly in the Deep South, and they viewed that as a model for how they wanted to act towards Jews, the Roma, the other various ethnicities that they saw as inferior, right? So the legacy of slavery and the legacy of Jim Crow in the United States was an aspiration to the Nazis. How interesting that if you follow that political and cultural legacy, you go from the Jim Crow stuff, from the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow, right, of apartheid in the South, in America, that takes you a perfect line to Nazi Germany, who the Nazis came out and said, yeah, we thought the Americans were doing it right. Hey, that'll work for us, right? You follow that to today's neo-Nazis in Ukraine, and they're like, yeah, that whole stuff over there in the way the Israelis are doing it, man, that really works for us. We're down with that. We could do some of that. Isn't it interesting that both of those things take their political and cultural legacy back to the United States? But at any rate, you see what I'm saying? If you look at the Ukraine and you look at Israel side by side, there's some interesting things that start to come out. What do we have in both of them? What I refer to as ethno-fascism, right? If you talk about fascism, capitalism, socialism, right? There are different brands. There are different strains of capitalism, different types of capitalism, or one might argue that capitalism runs along a line where depending on how it evolves, but there's different strains of capitalism. There's different strains of socialism. There's different strains of communism. You know what I mean? There's different strains depending on how a country, their background and culture will depend on how their particular political or economic or social ideologies express themselves, but we'll use the same word and we'll say socialism is, this country is socialism. Well, the way socialism expresses itself in Venezuela, in Cuba, and in China, and in North Korea, they're all different. They're all socialist countries, but they have their unique things about them. The same way with fascism, all of them, right? Now, the Ukrainians are saying they're not saying this, but they are saying it in their rhetoric, the ethno-fascism in Israel, that's the way we want to go. Which takes me to this. When you have that conversation, right, you automatically come up to this. In Ukraine, right, you've got the Western Ukrainians saying, we got the government, the United States helps us to maintain political and economic power. You got to understand that when the United States overthrew the government of Ukraine in 2014, when they were instrumental in a coup that placed the new government in power at that time, the Azov battalion and the various and sundry other fascist, neo-Nazi type, neo-Nazi inspired movements weren't all that powerful. They weren't as big as, they were maybe popular, but they weren't huge in Ukraine. After the U.S. took full power in Ukraine, the U.S. then empowered these neo-Nazi movements, brought them to prominence, and gave them the horsepower in the government that they have today. The U.S. put them in power, right? Israel, the U.S. and its allies, vassals, whatever you want to call it, maintain the power in Israel. They ensure that the Israeli government, which has under Netanyahu, Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, I would argue is an extremist government, whatever you want to call it, neo-Nazi, whatever, I don't care what word you want to use. It doesn't matter what you call it. It is clearly, to me at this point, is an extremist government. It is an outlier government. It's beginning to be a pariah government around the world. Other than the US, the world's starting to look and say, man, there's something wrong here. You guys are violent, brutal, vicious, and over the top. You're unhinged. What the hell's going on in Israel? That's what a lot of the world, most of the world, is starting to see. And the people in the United States don't see it. But the US maintains this extremist government in power in Israel. And why? Why? I've talked about this. What is the foundation? There's all kinds of things going on, ethnicity, but what's the foundation of Israel? I've said this over and over again. If you watch my channel, you probably are sick of hearing it. Israel is Fort Israel. It is a U.S. military outpost. There's lots of Muslim nations there, and they got oil and resources. The U.S. wants to control the oil and resources. It wants to have a huge military base, as much military power as it can in the region where all the oil and resources are. That's the main purpose Israel serves. Don't forget, the U.S., Joe Biden said, if Israel didn't exist, we'd have to create it to address our interest in the region. Alexander Haig referred to Israel as our unsinkable aircraft carrier. The rhetoric is clear. That's really what Israel is there for. So the truth is, they don't care what Israel does to the Palestinians or anything. That's the purpose Israel serves. It serves its purpose. Whatever Israel has to do, whatever has to happen to keep that government in power, the U.S. will support whatever has to happen to keep that government in power, because they got a military outpost. They got to maintain their military outpost in the region. And the Ukrainian government. And not to mention this, the U.S. government is an extremist government. It is an extremist government that's becoming a pariah and an outlier in the world. It only makes sense that they be aligned with Israel. Israel, to some extent, and Ukrainian governments to some extent, are mirroring the U.S. government. I mean, let's face it. Ukraine, what did they do to their? What did Zelensky do to the guy? Was named Victor? Was it Victor Medvedev? Medvedev. I don't remember the first name. It may have been Victor. But what did he do? The guy was polling higher than he was leading the top party, opposition party. He was polling higher than Zelensky. Zelensky locked him up, called him a traitor. What did he do? He went after him. He took him out. What are they doing here? There's Trump polling high. What do? They charge Trump with everything but pulling a tag off his mattress, and that's probably coming next. If you look at Israel, if you want to know the direction that the U.S. government wants to go, all you have to do is look at Israel. All you have to do is look at Ukraine, and you'll see a mirror. The U.S. government controls those two governments to a large extent. People want to believe that they don't, but they do a lot more than you would think. They are extremists, and people will say, well, Israel is so extremist, it's so it's such an outlier, it's completely out there. The United States doesn't control them, they do what they want. That implies that the United States is not an extremist, brutal outlier government, and that somehow the U.S. is aghast. Oh no, look at these terrible things that Israel are doing. If only we could control them. Don't fool yourself into thinking that somehow the neocons here are somehow less brutal, kinder, and gentler than the neocons in Israel. That ain't the case. They're sitting there rubbing their hands together. Yes, sirree, kill them all. That's what we do. Look at the U.S. 2.5 million Vietnamese, 800,000 people in Cambodia and Laos, just innocent people, slaughtered people all over South America, all over, went in 1 million Iraqis, slaughtered them. 500,000 dead Iraqis. You remember what Joe Biden's buddy that he mentioned the other day, Madeleine Albright, said? They asked her, hey, what do you think about all those dead kids? That's a fair price to pay. 500,000 dead Muslims. Who gives a crap? That's the way she came off. So, knowing that history, what makes you think that the United States gives a crap about the dead children in Israel. You know, people are looking at Israel like, oh my God, what they're doing is terrible. And oh, come on, United States, how come you're not doing anything about it? Have you forgotten the record of the United States? What Israel's doing? They haven't even cracked an egg yet. They haven't even got warmed up compared to the death and destruction that their masters in the United States have caused. So the idea that the U.S. is somehow upset and aghast over this happening, you're fooling yourself. It's people who want to believe somehow that the United States government is not as vicious and brutal as its record clearly shows that it is. No, it's not that that Israel has gotten out of hand and the United States can't control them and they've gone mad and extreme and oh, what are we going to do? They're killing people. It is that they're getting warmed up. They're just getting warmed up for the U.S. They're like, hey, U.S., you guys killed 1 million people in Iraq. Yep. 2.5 million in Vietnam. Yeah. 600,000 dead in Syria. Europe. Yeah. And what about over in Libya? Yeah, probably another 150,000 dead. Okay. We're going to get warmed up and start seeing how many people we can kill. And the U.S. is like, yeah, you don't even waste your time. You can't match us, man. You'll never match us. We're killing them by the millions. You can't do that. But, give it a shot. Give it a shot. It is wishful thinking amongst people in America and Europe to somehow think that that Israel is some brutal regime and the U.S. and its vassals in Europe are somehow upset and aghast by that, and they don't know what to do, and it's out of control. No. They're doing what the U.S. They're doing what the brutal colonial regimes in the EU. They're just mimicking them. But they're just not as good yet. They're not able to kill as many children, innocent women and children and elderly people. But give them time. Give them time. Somebody said, no, you slaughtered over 4 million in Vietnam. Look. It wouldn't surprise me if it was 10 million. The numbers are irrelevant. It's so many millions and millions of people that my point is, don't think that a country who slaughters people by the millions are going to be upset, aghast, or concerned over Israel slaughtering a few thousand. They're just like, yeah, whatever. They're just killing a couple thousand, not really that much. That's the way the U.S. empire is. But I say that to say this. I don't want to get distracted about Israel and Ukraine. So what Israel's doing is what the government of Ukraine right now would like to do. What they want to do, what if they had their way, their way, what would they do? The Russian speakers in Donbass, in the eastern region, they'd build a wall, they would starve them, they would bomb them, they would slaughter them. They've already said, hey, it's illegal to speak your language. What sense does that make? They would do the same kind of oppression if they could. Think about, we got two countries, put them side by side. In both countries, you have an extremist government that is both empowered and kept in power and protected and armed by the same neocons in the United States. Both of them are empowered. They maintain power through force of arms. And they're protected in the UN. Whatever, when the UN comes along and says, hey, you guys can't do that, veto the US. Yeah, they can. Well, but you're doing something brutal. You're killing innocent people. You're doing whatever. Let these people alone. They're protected by the same neocons of Washington. Both of them are an ethno-fascist where they're like, there's a group of people here and those people are inferior. They're genetically and intellectually inferior to us, and they have to be impressed, subjugated, if not annihilated. Do we see a pattern here? And one could look at the history of the United States, what they did, taking the land, enslaving people, and say, yeah, that's kind of a mirror of the U.S.'s history. It is. Whatever you think about it, it is. That's what the U.S. did. That's what Israel's trying to do. That's what Ukraine's all up to. Now, there's another interesting parallel, though, and that is in both instances, right? The powers in the area have arisen. The dynamics have changed that are preventing this scenario from going on indefinitely. Ukraine, what's going on? Russia, which, let's face it, after 1991, Russia was very poor, was not a very powerful nation, right? Impoverished, struggling, trying to make it. And it didn't have the military and economic power that it needed. However, Russia did have something. You know, it's kind of like you teach kids about an education. If you get an education, nobody can take that from you. You've always got that education, right? Or, I mean, whatever it is. I'm not saying everybody has to get a PhD or a master's degree or a Juris Doctorate. I'm just saying, as an example, let's say somebody learns to be an auto mechanic, you know, which is a reasonable trade if somebody wants to make a living, be an auto mechanic. If somebody learns to be an auto mechanic, that's an education they have that nobody can take from them. They can always go get a job fixing cars or do something fixing cars, right? So that's something that you always have. Doggone it! Sorry about that. My phone was ringing. You couldn't hear, and I got distracted. But at any rate, I'll continue. And wherever I was, people who watch my show know that I have ADD and it's easily soothed. Don't just all I got to do is like either read one of the comments, or like something happen off camera and that'll screw me up, and then I'll have to get myself back together. That's the nature of ADD. You're doing something, and all of a sudden there's a shiny object and you're like, hey, what's that over there, right? But at any rate, let's continue, and we'll get back to wherever I was. So what you got is two countries that both of them have I know it was, yeah, both of them have powers that over the last, say, 30 years have been rising in power to the point where they can challenge what they see as a problem, an unfair issue in their region. People who they align with culturally and religiously, etc., that they feel need to be protected, and they can step in. Let's start in Ukraine. Ukraine, what do you have? You have the Russian military, you have the Russian Federation rising in economic and in military power, so much so that they can say, look, we have a religious, cultural alignment with the people in Eastern Donbass. You, in Eastern Europe, U.S., are coming from halfway across the world to say, I'm going to support the people that are suppressing your people on your border. And Russia's position is, we're powerful enough to stop it now. It ain't happening. Not happening. And either you get out or we're going to kick you out, right? Meanwhile, what has happened so the U.S. is basically supporting an extremist regime in Eastern Europe to upset the balance of power in the region, particularly against Russia, right? To weaken Russia and to eventually, ideally, overthrow Russia as a rising power and snatch all of their natural resources, power, etc., and to go forward with their vicious and insane quest for world hegemony. Now, meanwhile, what's going on? So the people in Eastern Ukraine happen to be culturally, religiously, and economically aligned with a rising power in the region that the U.S. wants to suppress. Let's go to Israel. The people in Gaza happen to be culturally and religiously aligned with Iran, a rising power in the region that the U.S. wants to suppress. In both instances, these two countries are being supported by the U.S., and a big portion of that is world hegemony. There are rising powers in your area that we can use this to suppress those rising powers. We can use this to dominate the region. And the U.S. has supposed friends in Europe, but they want, as an example, look what they're doing to Europe. They blew up the Nord Stream pipeline because they want to dominate and suppress any country in the region that wants to be a rising power. Germany wants to be a rising economic power, maybe even military power. The U.S., again, can use this Ukraine conflict to blow up their pipeline and suppress Germany too. Saudi Arabia desires to be a rising world power. The United States can use this to bring Israel to more military prominence and to suppress Saudi Arabia. Everybody, they want Israel to be the dominant power in the region, and they want to control that power. They want basically what they want Israel to do. If you ever seen anybody standing there with a dog, and they got a leash, and they got one of these brutal German shepherds, and it's pawing at the air, and it's biting, and it's frothing at the mouth, right? And somebody's standing there back like this, and somebody's got the dog, and the dog's in the air, and he's right, and he just wants to tear this person apart, and somebody's just holding him back with that power to say, you know, anytime I want, I can let go of this leash, and if I got let go of that leash, that dog's gonna eat you alive, right? That's kind of what Israel is for the United States. The United States wants Israel to be that dog, armed to the teeth, a mad dog, frothing at the mouth, just waiting to attack. And it can say to the locals in the region, if you get on our nerves, if you do something, we're going to let go of the leash and this dog's going to tear you to shreds, right? It wants to utilize that to control even its so-called allies. And I'll say this. The Europeans are leaders are idiots, because if the United States actually got what it wanted in Ukraine, Ukraine would be the country in the region that the U.S. has the most power over, that has the most direct control over. So if the European powers, as idiots that they may be, leadership, was to help the United States get what it eventually wants, right? To get Ukraine into full power, to get Ukraine as this, let's not forget, the third largest military in NATO was what? Ukraine. Number one, US, number two, Turkey, number three, Ukraine. They built in the third largest military, and that if Ukraine, if they were successful and they were able to use Ukraine to bring down Russia, they would also use Ukraine to dominate and subjugate Europe, because the military would be far too powerful for anyone else in Europe to resist. Ukraine, and you can see what they're like. Listen to the Ukrainians over the course of time. Listen to what's come out of the Israelis since October 7th. Just absolutely unhinged, mad, vicious, brutal rhetoric. You know, we'll kill all of them, children, the starving people, the most brutal, vicious, insane rhetoric you could have imagined is coming out of their mouths. Listen to the Ukrainian government for the last couple of years, how they've talked about it. Did you see Sarah Ashton Cirillo? Did anybody see that video? The clenched teeth video, I call it. I'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Who the hell talks with their teeth clenched the whole time? And the Russians will suffer. We're going to hunt them down. And now listen to the Israelis. Listen to Sarah Ashton Cirillo. Listen to the Israelis and tell me you don't see a commonality here. Unhinged, crazy people. Just gritting their teeth with hatred, how they will smite their enemies. And their enemies happen to be a different ethnicity. And all of their enemies happen to be the same ethnicity, right? Ben Gvir, Smotrich, Netanyahu, we must fight and kill our enemies and blah, blah, blah. You got the same thing here, right? There's another issue we got to go to. And that is the powers in the region have become too powerful for this dynamic to be successful anymore. They become too powerful. So I don't have to tell you about Russia. It's fairly obvious what's happening with Russia. Russia's a very powerful military. And the idea that you're going to build Ukraine up, they were delusional to think they're going to build Ukraine up and they're going to take Russia out. But actually, they weren't as delusional as one might think. They had a devious plot, which was, okay, the Russian military may be too powerful for this, right? So the initial devious plot was, what we'll do is we'll create a disruption and a chaos on a Russian border. We will use that like a pathogen, right, to infect Russia, to infect the Russian culture with anger, with instability. And the Russian people will then, this infection will spread throughout Russia. And then, of course, there'll be color revolution protests, which, of course, we'll fund money to, with people like Alexei Navalny. And then they'll take Putin out. And then we'll say, we came, we saw, he died. And there will Hillary, and we win, right? The problem was it could never work because Russia is far too politically and culturally stable, right? But their plan was to take Russia apart. So their plan was, we're going to create a dynamic And then our intricate plot is a dynamic that will infect Russia culturally and politically and economically and fall apart. Boom, they get their war started, they do their sanctions don't work. Their infection doesn't take, right? We're going to infect Russia with cultural economic instability, and the patient will then die of that illness. The problem is Russia has a strong central government, strong cultural cohesiveness. It had a very strong, what the term we used to use is constitution, right? Russia had been taking vitamin D. Russia had been getting plenty of sunlight. Russia had been, doing all kinds of exercising, you name it. And so guess what? Russia had a strong cultural and political immune system. And when the neocons tried to infect it, it was able to reject the infection and come back stronger. And what do you know? This Putin that has a 64% approval rating goes up to 81% approval rating. Why? Because its immune system kicked in and it got stronger and it blew away the invader, and boom, there they are. It's healthier before. So now they're stuck with, hey, we tried the infection and Russia fought off the infection. So then backup plan, which wasn't even a plan. They're like, okay, we're screwed. What do we do? Well, that's fine. That's okay. What we're going to do now is we will simply continue to put the heat on Russia by maintaining this conflict indefinitely, and that will weaken Russia over the long term. Since we weren't able to take them out, and we will still pretend as though somehow Russia can't fight off the infection and they're going to fall. Sooner or later, they're going to go down, right? But the bottom line is this: we're going to weaken Russia. Slowly but surely. Ooh, why is my shoulder itching? Slowly but surely, we're going to weaken Russia. That's the new plan. That's the backup plan, right? Because why? Because Russia is a rising power in the European region, and our hegemony is challenged by rising powers. Let's move back to Israel, right? We're going to use Israel and all of the machinations in the area, right? We're going to bomb Syria, right? We're going to do everything we can. They went after the Ansar Allah, who they call the Houthi rebels. They went after Yemen. Why? Because they're allied with Iran. What are they going to do? They're going to go through all of the machinations they can to take out Iran. And Iran is the main, but what is one of the reasons? Two reasons. Number one, Iran is a rising power challenging U.S. independent power challenging U.S. hegemony. Number two, Iran is the main sponsors of the Palestinian freedom movement, right? They're arming them, they're training them, they're constantly, keeping them in the news. They're the head of what Iran and people in the region refer to as the axis of resistance. So they're going to take out Iran, which now nobody will be supporting the Palestinians. Boom. And so the Israelis will be happy. The Israelis can finish their ethnic cleansing, and the U.S. can say we've done away with any possible regional power that can challenge us. Same dynamic. But there comes a problem. The problem in both instances is Russia has become too powerful for the U.S.'s plan to work, right? For the neocon plan, they're not being weakened, they're being strong, they're getting stronger. Right, so they're not being weakened, and they're actually able to take out their enemies bit by bit and rise in stature on the world stage. And guess what? You look in Africa right now, you look in Latin America. One of the things that the U.S. Is complaining about is that RT and Sputnik are growing in support in Latin America. Right, growing. I don't know, tens of millions of people are listening to them. They're growing, and the U.S. being, let's say, we're in charge. Those little, Latin American people, the indigenous people, they're so stupid. They have no idea. They're just being had by Russia, not us. Not the people that have stolen all of their goods and overthrown their governments and genocided them. No, it's Russia with RT and Sputnik that's really doing them dirty. And Russia and RT and Sputnik is doing disinformation in South America that needs to be stopped. In other words, the people in South America are choosing an alternative that we don't like, and we have to stop them from choosing that alternative and get our mis and disinformation in. They don't have a right. They're not smart enough. Wow, those little South Americans are genetically and intellectually inferior to us. They are not smart enough to know that they're being had by the Russians. They're being taken. The Russians saying things like, you should be able to choose an independent manner of governing yourself. What manner of craziness is this, right? That's where they are. So what's happening is the world is starting to say what you want about the Russians. They look reasonable. And what do human beings seek? Stability. See, the neocons are the lords of chaos, right? They seek stability. What do people want to do? They want to know when I can get up in the morning, I can go have a job and feed my family. I can come home, the lights will be on. We'll have water that'll, fresh, clean water that'll work. I'll have access to food for my family, access to education. People want a stable basics. That's what they want. And they'll go from there. Well, maybe I can start a business. Maybe I can do something else. Some people may not want to. I just want to go to work, come home, and take my son down to the beach and go fishing. Good enough. Hey, that's great. Sit around with the family, and you go to Latin America, and there's the plaza in the afternoon, in the evening, and you go to the plaza in a country. It's beautiful. You go to a plaza. There's big, beautiful murals and paintings, multicolored all over the place. Somebody's playing some bachata, or somebody's playing some salsa, and families are out. Somebody's pushing a cart with fresh vegetable juice and etc. They don't have a lot of money, but trust me when I tell you this, haven't been to Latin America, that ain't a bad way to live. You know what I mean? They don't have a lot of money, but trust me when I tell you this. To see people who work during the day and 5, 6 o'clock in the evening, they're at a local plaza. There's palm trees around, right? There's fresh fish and things that people are cooking on a grill, selling or cooking for themselves, right? There's music playing and they're dancing salsa or bachata or merengue, right? There's, I don't know how much you know about South America, the most beautiful women on the face of this are still beautiful South American, whether they're in Venezuela, Nicaragua, what are these beautiful women, they're dancing around, the families are there, the little kids are there. That's what they want, stability. It's a great life. It's not a bad life. And people, that's what people want. A nice, stable life, no war, no nothing in the background. They look at Russia, they look at China, and they're saying they seem to be more stable. They don't seem to be going around saying, let's go to the US border and overthrow a country and pump it full of weapons, like the US is doing in Taiwan and Ukraine. They're like, Russia and China don't seem to be doing that for some reason. They're saying, let's go to your country and build a bridge and a nuclear power plant. I think Russia's now building a nuclear power plant in Burkina Faso, right? So China's building bridges and high-speed rail, stuff like that. Russia's building Burkina Faso. They're building a nuclear power plant, empowering the region. Again, what's that going to bring? Stability, economic opportunity. What's the U.S. doing? They're blowing the hell out of people, dropping bombs, firing missiles, destabilizing the entire Middle East. The whole world is now looking at Israel saying, look, we got a problem here. You're dropping bombs on innocent civilians and killing them. Whatever happened that you don't like, we understand that, but you just can't go slaughtering civilians like that. That's a war crime. We don't want to hear somebody else committed a crime against humanity. So our response is to create far greater crimes against humanity. No, people don't want to hear that. They want stability. They want people to go to the UN. They want it to work through the UN. They want the people to stop fighting, to find a way to help out, men, women, children, the elderly. That's what people want in this world. And so the global South is looking at Russia saying, you guys are the ones making sense. China, you guys are the ones making sense. We hear you in the UN. We see you in the UN. And we see these idiots from the US destabilizing everything. People want stability. They're looking at Russia and China. They're looking at Africa. Everybody's looking around saying, how can we get stability? And the U.S. empire is creating instability in Taiwan, instability in Ukraine, instability in the Middle East, in Israel. And of course, in both of those countries, the instability is based on an ethnic dispute that the United States is exploiting. The neocons are exploiting an ethnic dispute, and a dispute that certainly, however you describe it, borders minimal on some kind of ethno-fascism, some kind of apartheid, unfair, whatever word you want to use, state. Both of those, that's the game plan. The Russian-speaking people, it's illegal for them to speak their language. You could literally, you had people on the street, if they heard you speak Russian, you get a ticket, and you had to pay this ticket for speaking a language. And the language that everybody in you, that you grew up, your culture speaks, you couldn't read and write in your own language, and you think anybody wants that? You think the people in Crimea want that? You're fooling yourself. The U.S. empire wants it, though, because there's the instability, there's the ethno-fascism. Now, Iran, if you look at it, as I said, in Europe, you have Russia that has grown extremely powerful, and the U.S. just don't have the horsepower anymore to push Russia around, and Russia ain't going to have it. And Russia's very, very, I think, very patient, and they're just chipping away, and they're maintaining the pressure in Ukraine until they're just going to keep the pressure in until it collapses. I remember when I was in 8th grade, I always like to use analogies. When I was in 8th grade, I was on my junior high wrestling team. And one of the wrestling moves the guy said was like, if somebody gets on your back, right, and they reach around and grab you, right? So the guy's arm would be around, and he would that's a picture of somebody getting from behind you and bear hugging under, with your arms up like this, bear hugging the trunk of your body, right? And what the guy said is, you clamp down on that arm and drive your shoulder into the ground, right? So picture you're on all fours, which happens a lot in wrestling, right? You're on all fours and somebody is on your back trying to get you turned over so they can pin you, right? You're on all fours. When they reach around and grab you, when that arm comes around, clamp. So now their arm is around you, but you're clamped it and they can't pull it back, right? Drive your shoulder into the ground. And now what happens? That person's arm is being grabbed and they're being pulled. And the weight of your body and they're trying to resist, but you're not using your strength, you're using your body weight. And finally, eventually they'll pull and pull and pull until they give out, and then they'll collapse. It's just, you hold it, and eventually my body weight is going to overcome your strength of your ability to resist it. I can clamp and do that for 5 minutes. You can only pull but so long before you go down, then you're tired, right? It's using you're wearing a person down with using physics against them, right? And I just look at it and say, that's what the Russians are doing. They're wearing the U.S. empire down in Ukraine. They're using physics slowly but surely. We're going to keep the pressure on, and sooner or later, you're going to start running out of people. You're going to start running out of ammunition. You're going to start running out of weapons of war. And when those things happen, you'll run out of money. And when those things happen, you will run out of the drive. You will run out of the impetus. You will run out of the the mental drive to continue. And the people in your country and your region will start saying, why the hell are we still doing this again? And then eventually you'll flop. And that's all Russia's doing. They're keeping the pressure on. It's easy. If you've been listening to me, I've been saying for a long time, that's what I do. I would keep the pressure on. I would not do the big arrow offensive. I've been saying that for months and months. Why? I'm going to keep the pressure on. In self-defense, I've said it many times. What do you want to do? You want to get your opponent to a point where you can touch them on the forehead with a feather and they'll drop. You want to get them to a point, where, you don't have to, you can walk away and they'll just fall and flop. Right. And that's what Russia's doing. They're getting to the point. They're going to get Ukraine to the point where it just collapses and they don't have to go lose a bunch of people in a big offensive. And that seems to be coming. So Russia is the regional power, which also happens to be a world power in this instance, that the U.S. wants to overcome is far too powerful. It's too late, U.S. Russia's too powerful and too determined. You're not going to be able to use this ethno-fascist extremist regime to take them out. Same with Iran. Iran, technologically, they're loaded up to their ears with missiles. They've got a lot of power. It's a powerful military country. And Iran has built up a network of allies. Hezbollah, and of course, Iran's, the various Hamas, different countries, Iran, different resistance groups, right, in Syria, in Iraq, etc., all over the place. Even the Yemen, the people in Yemen, right? Iran has strengthened, empowered, and armed its allies in the region. So now Iran's everywhere. You know what I mean? That's why I'm here. I'm here. You can't hit me. I'm here. I'm ducking. I'm over here. I'm over there. I'm constantly moving. If you watch Mike Tyson fight, right, with his hands up like this, does he sit here like this? No, he's moving. He's over here, right? He's all over the place. When if you want to practice boxing, one of the things you do is you put up a rope for your boxing skills, right? You put up a rope, right? And you come on this side of the rope and you punch, so come on this side of the rope, throw some combinations on this side of the rope, throw some combinations, right? You're moving. You're not going to be a simple target that's easy to hit. And if you hit here, you might get a glancing blow. You got me moving, etc. Right? It's movement. I'm giving you multiple targets, things like that, right? Confuse you, can hit you from anywhere. In Kung Fu, the crane, right? What does the crane do? The crane, it's got the beak here, but what does the crane do? It's unorthodox. It's all over the place. It strikes from here, it strikes from there, it strikes from there. It's going to hit from all different angles, right? What does the Iranians do? They've empowered Yemen over here. They can hit you from there. Hezbollah's here. They can bop you from here. Iraq, military units here. Syria, units over here. So what are you going to do? You hit them over here, they can touch you there. You hit them over here, they can touch you there. They can touch you from all over. So what they've done is they've created a network of allies that are highly powerful, so that no matter where you hit Iran. So what if you hit Iran in Iran proper? Hezbollah is still armed. These other groups are still Iran. If you hit Iran in Iran proper, Iran can still strike you from 5 different places in the Middle East. It is extremely powerful. They've been extremely smart in the way that they've done this thing, and now they're set up, and they're just too powerful. The U.S. right now, let's say the U.S. says, okay, we're going to launch a military attack on Iran. Boom. Number one, Iran closes the Straits of Hormuz. It's mined, it's shut down, and they declare it's a war zone. Well, here's what people don't realize. What happens if the U.S. says, well, we're going to go in and we're going to protect and clear the Straits of Hormuz? Iran has a lot of ballistic missiles and anti-ship missiles. And the Straits of Hormuz is, I don't know what, 25 miles wide or something. Send a ship in there and see. You sit and duck for ship missiles. Anti-ship missiles. So if the U.S. were to try to keep the Straits of Hormuz open, where 30% of the world's oil goes through, anything they sent in there, the Iranians would blow it to bits with ease, number one. But number two, here's what people don't realize. They wouldn't have to. Once the Iranians mine the area and say this is a war zone, most of your international shipping companies and your international, they have these, not most, but international shipping companies all have insurance, right? It used to be Lloyd's of London that did all the insurance, but now there are a lot of other insurers around the world. But what do insurers say? Even check your life insurance. A lot of life insurance says, we won't cover you if you die in a war zone. If you die during war, in a war zone, we won't cover you. Most of these shipping lines, if not all of these insurance companies, say, we're covering you and we'll cover your insurance for your payload, your ship, and everything. However, you're not covered in a war zone. So you've got all of these ships that would normally be traversing. And if the U.S. says, okay, we're going to clear the Straits of Hormuz so 30% of the world's oil can keep moving, and Iran says, it's closed and we'll attack you if you come through, it becomes a war zone. And guess what? These ships can't really do it because they don't have insurance anymore. Are you going to go? Let me ask you this. Are you going to go out and buy now these pickup trucks are $60,000? And let's just say you got a business that you have to use your pickup truck for. You bought a pickup truck, and that's what you use for your business, lawn mowing, whatever the hell, right? You buy the $60,000 pickup truck. And you buy your mowers and all these things you're buying, you're going to have a lawn mowing company. And you say, oh, great, there's a new neighborhood called the Middle East, right? Middle East Grove. And all of these people in there want me to cut their grass. I got lots of business there. And your insurance company calls and says, look, we've had a lot of thefts. We've had all kinds of terrible things in Middle East Grove. Your truck and your equipment is not insured. anywhere in that neighborhood. If you go in that neighborhood, we're not covering your truck. If it gets stolen, blown up, accident, and your equipment, we ain't covering it. Are you going to take any jobs in Middle East Grove? No, you're not, because you have too great an investment in your equipment. You're not going to give up, take a chance of losing all your equipment and all your other jobs. You're just going to say, I can't cut any lawns in Middle East Grove because my insurance doesn't cover me, right? If the Iran says Straits of Hormuz is closed, are these, ships worth hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars with tens of millions of dollars in cargo? Are they just going to say, we'll just ignore that and go in? No, they're not going. Just the fact that Iran closes it and declares it a war zone means that shipping traffic ain't going to go through it. I don't care if the U.S. is able, which they wouldn't be able to, but if they were able to keep it open, the ships couldn't do it because they wouldn't have insurance. Right? So the long and short of it is that Iran has economic cards they can play. They have various allies that they have empowered. They're just too powerful. And might I add this? The people in the region, both Sunni and Shia, or Arab and Persian, however you want to put it, right, have a love for the Palestinians and the freedom of the Palestinians. In the event, I've talked about this in other videos, in the event that they were to believe, look, it's genocide, the Palestinians are being slaughtered. In the event that they were to believe that, look, the United States and Israel are at war, they're both bombing the Palestinians and Hezbollah, etc., there is the distinct possibility that it would become a civilizational war. They keep saying a regional war. That's the wrong term, a civilizational war, where the Muslim people say, we've had it, we're kicking your asses out of here. You want a war, you're going to get war, but it ain't going to be the kind of war where you just fight a state actor, right? You got Malaysia, I believe it is, 260 million Muslims. You got countries all over the world with a lot of Muslims. You've got Muslims. What do you think is going to happen to France? What are you going to think is going to happen in the event that this thing went really bad and some of the top imams in the Muslim world went forward and said, they're slaughtering our people, they're killing us, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to issue a fatwa, which is like a religious edict. And that is the United States and Israel have to be defeated. And all people of the Muslim faith, it is your duty to Allah to join in the jihad against Israel and the US and its allies. What happens if something like that goes down? You can't win that one. They'll tear Europe to shreds. The US, things ain't going to be so great. There's a lot of Muslim people here. I'm not saying that all of them would join in, but some of them would surely join in if there were a religious edict that it was their duty to protect. And could you look, if they believe that the US and Israel are trying to wipe out Muslims, is it irrational? Would it be irrational? That I put it like that. I've heard people say, well, if somebody invaded my country, invaded my town, I'd pick up my gun and I'd die defending my home. Who wouldn't, right? Yeah, you got, Joe Schmo here. He goes to work every day. He's got his wife and kids, and somebody says, I'm going to come kill your family and everybody in your neighborhood and attack them. He's going to take his gun. You may get him, but I'm going down fighting and I'm taking some of you bastards with me. There's a lot of people that would do that, right? If the Muslim people feel as though, hey, the Americans and the Israelis have decided they're just going to genocide us. Ain't happening. We're fighting you everywhere. There will be no safe quarters on this earth. If that happens, so you've got a regional power that is far too powerful for the United States to dominate, right? Additionally, you have the Muslim people of the world who are far too unified. Granted, as I said, there's Sunni, there's Shia divides. We know that. But when it comes to Israel, the U.S. is doing a pretty good job of bridging those Sunni Shia divides. So you've got the U.S. in Ukraine, where you have a conflict inspired by the United States based on ethno-fascism. You have Israel, a conflict, and I'm going to argue inspired by the United States for this reason. Look, this thing's been going on for a long time. Whatever you say about Israel having the right to exist, not having the right to exist, I have my views on it. I think when You've got people who are living in a country, and some other people come in and say, it's my country now. We have a historical, multi-thousand-year-old claim to it. So you got to give me all your homes in your country. There are those of us who have a problem with that. However, that being said, we are where we are today now. We are where we are. And so the United States, at minimum, needed to push for an independent Palestinian state, and needed at minimum to say, look, the Palestinians have lost their homes, etc. Any area where there can be right of return, there should be. But if they can't return, they should be materially compensated. They should have a home that is comparable to their family's home or land that they lost. They should have economic compensation for the families and those who lost their property and lost their home. We need to sit down. The world needs to sit down at the UN and say, hey, man, these people lost their homes and they lost all their stuff. How can we find a way to recognize A, their security needs, and B, their right to be compensated for their loss? Anybody has a right in court. You should have a right to be compensated for a loss. It was an unjust loss. Somebody else had an unjust enrichment. You should be able to compensate for it. That's actionable. So the U.S. has had a duty decades and decades to simply say, let's turn down the heat. Let's sit down and negotiate. Let's see that, look, the Israel ain't going nowhere. Let's see that the Israelis turn down the volume, and that they're not at war with anybody, and that the Palestinians are adequately compensated in a way that we shake hands at the UN blesses it, the Israelis shake hands, and that's that. Now, people say the Israelis will never do that. Of course they will never do it, because the United States doesn't want them to do it. If the US came and said, damn, you're going to do it, you're going to do it, or we ain't giving you money or nothing, they'd have no choice. So ultimately the blame lies on US policy on this. But the Israelis will do what they look what's going on now. The U.S. is over there saying, yeah, you need to do this, you don't need to do it. They're going to do what the hell the U.S. makes them do. They will do it. And they would if the U.S. wanted to resolve this conflict. But the U.S. has no desire to resolve the conflict, because the U.S. wants to use the conflict to maintain its world hegemony, to maintain its domination over the region where there's all of that oil. And I think the Muslim people ain't having it. And so the U.S. has pushed this thing as far as they can, and they've run up against a brick wall. And that brick wall is Iran and the Muslim people. And where do they sit? If the U.S. attacks Russia, let's go with Ukraine. The U.S. says, that's it, we're going to attack Russia. They're going to get nuked. And they're done. It's over. They attack Russia. We're going to attack Russia and take Russia out. Number one, at this point, I don't know that the United States military has the wherewithal to defeat Russia, right? Things ain't looking good. Not in the land war, that's for sure. And Russia has, the hypersonic missiles. Let's face it. What does the U.S. have? 14 aircraft carriers, 14 missiles. 14 hypersonic missiles is what it would take to disable, if not sink, all of those damn aircrafts. Does the U.S. really wouldn't? Maybe not sink them, but boy, it wouldn't be good for them to get hit by the hypersonic missile, right? The damage would be irreparable. So the U.S. to go, and if the U.S. said, okay, we're sending troop carriers over, and we're going to send 1 million troops, which we don't have, over to fight Russia. I don't know if you know this, Russia's got submarines with missiles and all kinds of stuff. How are those ships going to get across the Atlantic with all of those people? They're going to have to fly them over and, hope they don't get shot down. So the bottom line is this. As I said, they can't, if they say we're going to war with Russia, that's it for the U.S. empire. That's it. One way or the other, that's it for the U.S. empire. Even if, as they say, even if you win, you lose. If you start looking too good, Russia will nuke the hell out of you, and you're done. Russia has the wherewithal to stop you. Now, let's say the U.S. says, that's it, we're going all in after Iran. If they do, number one, Iran closes the Straits of Hormuz. I don't know how much you know about the derivatives market. Derivatives is nothing but insurance. That's what it is. It's insurance. And in the energy futures market, and people are betting on what the energy price is going to be, and they go out and they take insurance in case they lose and the energy market goes bad. They all got insurance, derivatives, credit default swap, right? We're going to swap it. I have, if my investment in energy futures goes bad, I got insurance, I lose that all, my insurance company will pay me off. But these are tens of trillions of dollars in derivatives. If Iran closes the Straits of Hormuz and all of that oil futures money collapses, it's like this. The insurance company that's insuring all of those investments in energy or in oil futures can't pay if all of them collapse at the same time, just like an insurance company, a life insurance company, right? They got all of these people who have a life insurance policy, right? A pool, it's an investment. Insurance is based on a pool of people, right? But no insurance company could pay if every single person they have life insurance on died at the same time. The insurance company would go bankrupt and collapse because no insurance has the insurance company has the liquidity to pay if everybody dies at the same time, right? If a car insurance company, Geico, Allstar, State Farm, they've got all these millions and millions of cars that they're insuring, right? But if every car got crashed and totaled at the same time, none of these companies have the liquidity to pay off all that money at the same time. Likewise, if Iran shuts down the Straits of Hormuz, oil stops coming out of the Middle East because there's a regional / civilizational war. If that happens, all these oil futures speculators all go to the insurance company derivative market, right? At the same time and say, okay, we all lost trillions and trillions of dollars. The insurance companies are going to say, we don't have the liquidity, we don't have the money in the bank to pay you all off at the same time. We're going to collapse. And the derivatives markets, tens of trillions of dollars, collapses. And think about it. They don't just have insurance policies or derivatives on those. There's all of these other things, right? What else is going to happen? People are going to have investments in oil futures. That all collapses tens of trillions of dollars, right? But what about the people who have all this other money invested in the market? You think they don't have insurance policies also? You think they haven't swapped the credit default liabilities with an insurance company? So people stop getting oil. All of these companies that use oil, all these companies that are reliant on a strong market, now their stocks go, ugh! And all of these investors at the same time, all across the board, call the insurance companies and say, hey, we lost all of our investments. We need to pay off 80, $100 trillion in derivatives markets and insurance policies all collapse at the same time. We're losing all our money. Can you pay us off? And the insurance companies say, no, we can't pay everybody at the same time. And the U.S. government, so that you look at the government, hey, U.S., can you bail us out? Well, that's 80 trillion. Yeah, we can't bail you out either. Collapse. So if the U.S., people are like, the U.S. wants to go to war with Iran. I don't think they really want to, because if they do, it is economic collapse of the derivatives market. This neoliberal system of creating a complicated financial tools on Wall Street and then swapping the default liabilities, the credit default liabilities, by buying insurance policies on things on your investments in case they crash. This whole joke of a system, Iran can pull a plug on it by closing the Straits of Hormuz and making it very, very difficult, if not impossible, for the flow of oil to continue to the West. And who sells oil, by the way? Russia. The price of oil goes through the roof, and Russia will not be able to spend all the money that they'll make. They'll be like the only ones pumping oil. How about Venezuela? Right? These countries won't be able to, they won't have enough wheelbarrows to push around loaded with the money that they have. So you will empower Russia as like the richest country. That oil, they can't pump it fast enough, and everybody's screaming, begging them for it. And you know what Russia's going to say? Yeah, we'll give it to. We're still selling oil to Iran. To China. We're still selling oil to India. Oh, U.S. empire, you guys need oil, don't you? Yeah, no. Best of luck to you, but you ain't getting none of our oil. Not going to happen. So I don't know if the U.S. really has the wherewithal and really wants to go up against Iran, because Iran has so many arrows in its quiver. Allies, economic destruction, you name it. Do you really want to do that? That's nuclear. Iran may not have a nuclear weapon, but they do have an economic nuclear weapon. So again, the U.S. is messing around with Ukraine in a region where there's an entity far too powerful for them to conquer. And they were hoping to use these clandestine, not so clandestine machinations of using a proxy to take out Russia. That's flopping. And of course, in the Middle East, you've got a combination of the unity of the Muslim people and their ability to come together and fight in jihad if they need to. You've got a combination of Iran's rise to power, its wisdom in strengthening and empowering its allies, and its knowledge that I can close the Straits of Hormuz, its geographical proximity to the shipping lanes where it can say, I can make your friggin' life miserable economically. Do you really want that? Those are the two, both ways. Those are two things that if the United States tries to push its hands too far, push itself too far in either direction, on either one of these, Israel or Ukraine, it's suicide. And of course, meanwhile, they're looking at Taiwan, and the US is starting to realize something. Yeah, we want to go utilize Taiwan to go after China. It's getting to a point where they're realizing they ain't ever going to be able to get there. They ain't ever going to be able to get there, because the situation in Europe is gone real bad for them and their allies, and they're going to have to try to deal with that. The situation in the Middle East is gone real ugly, and they don't have the economic or military wherewithal to deal with that. And need I say, Africa's coming. In the event that something gets fired up really bad in Israel, there are a lot of Muslims in Africa, and the AFRICOM bases will get taken out. You know, the U.S. stands it to, if they keep pushing this thing, to lose all their bases in the Middle East. That the Muslim people in the Middle East just say, we had enough, we're attacking all the bases, and take out all of their bases in the Middle East. And if that happens, a lot of those bases in Africa will be, once somebody sees bases being taken out in a region, you can rest assured that ain't the only region those bases will be attacked, that the Africans will say it's time for AFRICOM to go too. Let's make our move. So the U.S. is playing it, really dangerous in two areas, but they're two areas where, man, how about those similarities? A lot of similarities between the two. And I wanted to touch base on that. Hey, I got to run. Thanks a lot, everybody. Please, if you can, share this on all your social media platforms. You see everything going across the bottom. Patreon.com, PayPal.com. Buy me a coffee is always a good option. Cash App, my information is there. If you can support the channel, I would appreciate it. Peace. I'm out.